So, friends, we had stopped at at a juncture when we thought that how to proceed further. Then, if these are the if we can't have certain laws, then what kind of history and how to write that history. Here, the role of selectivity becomes very important in writing history. By this selectivity, I mean selection of facts and selection of historical facts. Those facts are historical facts which have certain consequences. Otherwise, millions of people are crossing the roads, but these are not historical facts. But if some important gentleman who is giving some policy or whose arrival makes certain drastic changes, like Caesar crossing the Rubicon, or any dignitary participating in any of the forums, when they make policies for the whole world, those are historical because they have certain consequences. Therefore, the very nature and availability of evidence in different phases of history is a crucial phase of, a crucial aspect of writing history. The question is why I am saying this. Different phases of history. You see, in different phases of history, in my last lecture, I has also told you that for our ancient India or ancient Indian history, we have very limited number of sources, very limited. Till first century AD, when we find the first inscription, which is discovered from Ayodhya, earlier it was believed that 150 AD inscription was the first Sanskrit inscription. Now we have undated that. First century AD we have found a Sanskrit inscription. Before that we have Ashokan Prakrit inscriptions from Mauryan period. So writing has come. There is a debate, so writing has come, but written materials are scarce, very few. It becomes more, prolific when paper was discovered. And paper was discovered in China in the first century AD, and gradually it migrated to Arab world around in the 8th century, and from there it went to European world. And by the time even paper, availability of paper was not so useful. It was useful, I am not denying that, but it became more useful with the invention of printing press at Gutenberg. Now, with the movable typeset, you can print many books in a very short time. In our country, we had the tradition of writing manuscripts, handwritten books and other things. So it has its own limitation. That's why I'm saying that we have in the different phases of history, the availability or chances of availability of facts is also accordingly limited. By the time we come to the British period of our history, there are archives after archives full of documents. They were handwritten, but they are maintained. Go to our national archives, go to our state archives. I had been to some of them. You will find varieties of documents dealing with varieties of subjects. But then the problem will be that there will be significant gaps. This gap in knowledge is caused by the availability of facts. So the question arises that how to be selective when we have such a menacing, I would say, paucity of records, very frightening paucity of records, owing to the chance survivals. Even the Ashokan inscriptions have by chance survived. There are many inscriptions. If you read inside, Epigraphia Indica or Indian Antiquary, you will find stories that some of the inscriptions, which were written on the stone slabs, the washermen were using on the banks of the Ganges to wash their clothes. So they were, by chance they survived. The historian traveling through that locality could see that, look here, there is something written, so retrieved it. So these are the these are the problems in history writing. So the chance survivals of the records. For example, I will give you one classic example from Babarnama. It's a well-known book, but there are certain periods, 3 or 4 years, for which we don't have any account. And Babar was not someone who was not writing for the daily diary, but those records are missing when he's dealing with the eastern UP part. So we don't have anything. Maybe by chance it has survived in some personal collection or somewhere. Let us hope so. But till that is found, a very important segment of Babarnama, the information about that period is missing for us. So this is one. Then another thing is that there are many reasons why these blanks are there. If we depend on archaeological evidence, so the chance survival of the evidence. If we deal with any other source, there are also. For example, if I am a writer, and I belong to 13th, 14th century, maybe I am least interested in the rulers of those times, so I won't write about them. So you are lacking that chance of getting records. There is a source, primary source. One author of 14th century has written about the age, but he is concerned with environment, he is concerned with other things, flora and fauna, not concerned with the the rulers or the society as such. He is not giving any description of how the markets operated, who were the people, who were the merchants. So that is again a matter of chance. So that chance is also related to the consciousness of the author writing consciously about a particular subject. So there are so many problems involved in it. Now the question arises how to fill these blanks. We will have to, in order to reconstruct reconstruct a connected past, we will have to look for filling of the gaps in order to get that information. When, as I said, when we pass on to the modern age, I call it embarrassment of riches. Now suddenly in the British period, so many records are there. The question arises, which record should be given precedence over which record? So the historical methodology says that if the earliest report should be considered, if it is very comprehensive, then after that, if the same information is repeated in other records, they are not primary source for information for us. You can dispense with them. Or in a footnote, you can mention that, look here, this is also mentioned in these records. That is the embarrassment of riches. But for ancient and medieval period of our historians are grappling with these vast gaps, gaps in our knowledge which are intermittent and intermittently interrupted. To set the balance right, we must select what we, on a general view of historical process, consider more important. So you have to be selective. You can't write a book of, say, 5,000 pages and ask the reader to read everything there, as I said in the last lecture. So you have to be selective. For earlier periods, we have to increasingly resort to certain logical, ascertained assumptions and inferences. Here I would say that, to fill our gaps, how to fill and why to fill, and why, for the very reason that a factor does not cease to be important, because the literate elite, as I said in my own example, that had I been writing in 14th century, I would have not mentioned certain things. So the literate elite of this time, what was important to them they had a disdain for these kind of things. So they did not design to leave behind any record of it. For example, the lower classes of society, they were not concerned with them. Tariq-e-Firoz Shahi is a classic example. And he had a contempt also. He would say the Bazarian, if the person from low born within quote, of inferior background, is occupying the place closer to the Sultan, he has a contempt for it. He said this Bazarian, these low born people are getting closer to the emperor, and that is why Alauddin Khalji is not a good ruler. He should only depend on this elite, and elite have their own predilections. They are not concerned with the general masses. So you won't find, we do find scattered information about masses, but that is not their conscious policy. They are not writing about them. So the question arises, can a historian afford to imagine wildly? If you imagine wildly, historical exercise will lead to wilderness. So you will have to have an idea of reality, which one famous philosopher, Sir Isaiah Berlin, very anti-Marxist, but he gave this title to one of his books, The Idea of Reality. I invoke that idea in historical narration also. So, what you should have an idea of reality. We cannot say that in ancient or medieval India we had all computers. This will be considered bogus because you don't have any reference. So, idea of reality should be closer to reality, meaning thereby that Carr says that we should have historical imagination which is based on controlled speculation for constructing historical narrative on the basis of a balanced selection of facts. Balanced selection. So the question arises, why does a historian select facts? Is it decided by subject we decide to write about? Is it the subject which decides? Or is it the historian who decides? Then the question arises, whose past the historian or historians decide to write about, to reconstruct? In other words, whose narrative? Whose narrative? Originally or ordinarily, nowadays, after Renaissance, when Petrarch wrote a poem which is considered to be the first national anthem of any country, Italy. He is writing, a poem. Now, in most of the textbook, you will find that the Treaty of Westphalia is considered to be the landmark from where we start finding the notion of nation. But if you go far behind them, then you find that it is from Renaissance onwards that people started thinking in terms of a nation. And after getting our independence in 1947, our first Prime Minister decided to mark the boundaries of various states on the basis of languages. So linguistic boundaries were created. This is happening in 1950s. And just think about those times, in the 16th century. The people who knew German, they were occupying a particular territory of Europe, where German, the people who knew German language, they were inhabiting that land. Similarly, Italian, similarly Dutch, similarly English. So, a kind of linguistic boundary was coming into existence. It had become some sort of a reality. The history, ordinarily history means history of a nation, normally considered as a national history. For example, we write history of India, history of China, history of now Pakistan, history of Great Britain, history of America, and etc. You can go on lengthening your number of nations and number of histories. Though some countries in their present frontiers are of very recent origin. For example, where was Pakistan before 1947? So these boundaries are as late as that, as recent as that. Secondly, political or cultural frontiers of most countries have also greatly changed over time with the passage of time. For example, take the case of Turkey. Take the case of Turkey. Most languages, they tend to be spoken in a geographically well-defined regions, as I told you just now, since their spread depends on the degree of human interaction, how much migration is taking place. So people tend to mix more and intermarry with such things, so that in course of time a broad correspondence is achieved between genetic and linguistic frontiers. To be, that begins to emerge. So, but such correspondence is often misleading. There are no genetic controls by which one person speaks one language better than another. Biologically, your language is not decided. Your interaction with others decide your language. In other words, the particulars of pronunciation are transmitted not by birth, but what a person hears, especially in childhood, when he is learning something at home and something in school or something outside. So there is no necessary relationship between a language group and a genetic group. In other words, there is no monopoly of any genetic group to claim that this language belongs to this particular group. This discards the race theory of language. I will give you one example, and I consider Ashoka to be one of the best examples of this. When he is writing his inscription, the text is same. Text is similar, depending upon what kind of rock edict he is writing, minor rock edict or rock edicts as such. Text would be not varying, but linguistic variations are there. He is, if these are located in Vaishali or Magad, then you will find he is telling us, he is spelling the term Raja as Laja, rivers as Ladi, Nadi. Na is not there, so Ladi. There's, these tiny details also speak a whole lot about Ashoka's concern about linguistics. When we have this inscription from Berat near Jaipur, they are closer to Sanskrit pronunciation. In the eastern rock edicts, you will find instead of Priya Darshi, where R is there, R sound is there, Priya Darshi, which is available in Sanskrit. But in Prakrit, the Ra is dropped, so it becomes Piya Dasi. S is doubled. So instead of R, double S is used. And he is very conscious because he is addressing the people of those areas who can make sense out of it. I was pleasantly surprised when I was reading the Sannati inscription written near, which has been found near Mysore. Many South Indian terms come there. So as I said that no racial group can claim that, or no genetic group can claim that this particular language is because of their birth, right from their birth. No, it is not like that. It's not like a property rights. For example, recently we find the relatively young family of language, the Turkic, they are also creating problem, because this is no older than 1500 years ago. Now this is spoken, Turkic language is spoken over a large area of Asia and Europe. The Kurds, up to Mesopotamia, Iraq and other places, Turkic is being spoken. In Central Asia, Babur knew Turkish. His Tuzuk-e Babri is written in Turkey. So very vast area of this language group was there. Now, much of the spread of this language was caused by migration, originally from Mongolia, which is in western China, which is very fairly documented by historical sources. This is a historical fact, this is historically established, but still you will find the people of Turkey, the leading, now they have changed the spelling. I have the old spelling. Now they don't write Turkey like this. They write, I, then Y and E, Turkey. Similarly, Ukraine, they have different spellings now. Now, Turkey speaking Turk speaking people, they are basically Caucasoids, generally very close to Greeks and quite distant from the oldest Turkish speaking people, which are the Uyghurs, the Uyghurid people of western China, who are northern Mongolites, but they say that no, we have Greek origin. In India also, we have this problem. There is no marked difference among speakers of Munda, that is Austroasiatic, Dravidian and Indo-European languages. All are classed as Caucasoids. But in the case of Turkey, in its history before 1200 is the history of Greek-speaking people. The modern Turks, they disown this legacy, they disown this genealogical ancestry, and they try to seek they want to assert and exert that their history of the Turkish people began with their migrations out of Mongolia and western China some 1500 years ago. So they are denying that they were of the Greek stock. They have their own political considerations for that. There might be host of considerations for that, but the historical fact is what I explained. So, why I am referring to this Turkish or even Indian thing, because you cannot, the historian should not feel comfortable with such biases when you are reconstructing the history of any country, for the moment history of Turkey, or as in our case, we have the Aryan bias in writing history of India. This is not scientific actually. So we would try treat the national history as the history of those people, those inhabitants who had inhabited a particular area, particular land from earlier times, for a considerable period of time in a particular territory. They have occupied and they can claim as a nation. So whatever the language they spoke or professed, that does not deny them a national identity. And India is the best example of that. We have varieties of languages, but you can't say that, look here, you speak, you write in Gurumukhi, so you are a different nation. They are not a nation. They have an identity, no problem. But you cannot say that if I am speaking Urdu, then I am a separate nation. If you are speaking Hindi, you are a separate nation. People do say that, but these are very, very unacceptable bogies for a historian. So that's why I am saying that we also encounter analogous problems in India when particular religious communities, the castes and their tribes, when they start espousing their spatial identities and demand separate histories for them. This is not necessarily, I must say, I must concede that this is not necessarily unjustified in all cases, especially in the case of Dalits and women, history of women, Dalits. Why? Because of course they were left out of the mainstream history, written history, for a considerable period of time. Therefore, one must remember and hold it when we are reconstructing our sectional histories, then we cannot overlook the changes in other parts of the society. Indeed, the evolution of social and political frameworks as a whole, of which sections concerned were part of it. Therefore, historical accuracy in interpreting certain things should not be sacrificed for other considerations. However, any group's anxiety may appear to be more convincing about their past, to explore their past. But that should not disturb or that should not waylay the historical exercise, historical reconstruction. We will have to be very serious about it. Otherwise, there would be history of various, there would be, I would say that there would be disintegration of history. History would, would divide and subdivide, and it will lead to a splintering of history in many, different identities. Even among one single tribe, you will find there are many tribes or many, clans. So even the clans will claim that, look here, I can trace my history from that period. So there will be a very hodgepodge of history, a very unacceptable mix of history. If we take, when I was talking about gaps, I must bring in here one very important fact, that when we are dealing with, history of India, we have two kinds of history which we are perceiving. One history is comparatively or relatively well documented, especially of the northern part where major empires emerged. Mauryan Empire, then Kushan Empire and other empire, Gupta Empire and other empires up to Mughal period. You have very large empires. But at the same time, we should not forget that in the southern part, we had Vijayanagar Empire, which had a very huge capital, which had a very huge territory under it, huge army under it. So those things should be, they are also documented. So documented history, even if there are gaps, we can, with controlled speculation, write about them. We may agree or disagree with our assessments. Burton Easton said that the South Indian Vijayanagar Empire was, segmentary state, or Chola Empire was like this. So you may have a different point of view of history. You may say that, like Mukhya, Hansbas Mukhya, he said that was there feudalism in India? Our serious historians like A.L. Basham, even the teacher of Romila Thapar and R.S. Sharma, he also writes he uses a very consciously, he is cautious about that. He uses the term quasi-feudalism. R.S. Sharma says that, look here, the feudalism was there, those kind of relations were there, but there was some difference from the European version of it, so he called it Indian feudalism. Then many people challenged this application, so he marshaled other facts also in support of him. He wrote his thesis and he wrote Urban Decay. So you can go on compiling and filling those gaps with the advancement of knowledge, with the discovery of new facts which are happening every day. Archaeologists are discovering many things. We are finding new texts also. For example, Arshas Nobody knew about Arshastra. Akbar didn't know about Arshastra. Otherwise, there is every likelihood that he could have got it translated. There was no Arshastra until R. Sama Shastri discovered it in 1920s. So we can go on, adding to it. For example, our historiography of medieval India is mainly based on Persian sources. Then we have vernacular sources. Some South Indian scholars, they started looking into the vernacular sources. So Tamil, Telugu, other literature were brought into the significant, into it. Now we have historians who are dealing with European sources, French, English. Of course, we were dealing with French, Portuguese, French, and then Dutch, Swedish, Swede language. They also had their East India Company settled at Nagapattinam. So they have their records. Those records are further filling up the gap. They are helping us in filling up the gaps. For trade and commerce, you don't find much information in Persian sources. You have to depend on these company sources because they were concerned with the trade and commerce, so they were writing about it. Persian sources are very reticent about mentioning of the merchants. Here you will find in those company records varieties of merchants of different substance were reported. They were very small merchants and they were very substantial merchants. Virji Vohra, I don't think there is much in Persian sources, but there is some information in Shah Jahan's Farman and others, but they are very scattered. So you can thus fill in the blanks and settle your anxiety. So in a given situation, historian has a possibility of multiple choices at any given situation, which are described by his sources, which he is using. Then he is examining those sources from a particular angle. If I am doing trade history, I will consult the trade history things. If I am concerned about how what was the size of population at that time, I will have to devise different methods for it. So this is our concern, which will go on. Now to conclude, I would say that historians' own assessment is very important because that is decisive in framing the questions with which you are going to look for the facts. So three things will be involved in that. First, you will have to look for the basic facts. Then you will have to apply your historical imagination. Then you will have to situate those facts in those particular times from where you have culled those facts, not according to our present perceptions. Otherwise, it will be very faulty. Then you can have a coherent assessment of your past, otherwise it will be lacking, as it is lacking in many of the history textbooks now. The history writer simply transmits, of course unwittingly, a miscellaneous mixture of other people's opinions or assessments. He does not thereby achieve objectivity with which we had begun our talk. Objectivity is lost the moment you are guided by other considerations. So, you will be actually deferring the subjective view of others. Therefore, interpretation and subjectivity cannot be discarded from a serious history writing exercise. Therefore, in writing history, you cannot be very objective. You cannot afford to be extremely positivist. You will have to be relatively subjective, because it is the historian whose own perception of facts will determine the nature of reconstruction of history. Thank you very much.